It was the way she stood, quiet but steady, as if the dust and wind of the prairie had learned not to bother her. She came in just before sundown when the sky turned a soft gold and the long shadows stretched across the yard. A covered wagon creaked to a halt near the fence, its wheels worn from miles of rough road. A single horse stood hitched, head low, breathing slow. The farmhands paused their work, glancing over with mild curiosity, but no one stepped forward. Except him. He had been counting feed sacks near the barn when he saw her. At first, he thought she might be another traveler passing through, asking for water or directions. That happened now and then, but she did not move like someone in a hurry. She climbed down from the wagon carefully, as if every step mattered, holding a folded quilt close to her chest. It was stitched in small, careful patterns, the kind that told a story if you looked long enough. She looked younger than he expected, though her eyes carried something older, something that had seen more than her years should allow. Her dress was plain, neat but worn at the edges. A few loose strands of hair had slipped free from her bun, brushing against her cheek in the evening breeze. She didn't call out or wave. She simply waited. He walked toward her slowly, wiping his hands on his vest. There was something about her presence that made him cautious, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the quiet confidence, or maybe it was the way she seemed to belong there without asking permission. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. She nodded once and unfolded the quilt in her arms. The fabric caught the last light of the sun, revealing a mix of colors, each piece carefully chosen and stitched with patience. It wasn't just a blanket. It was work, time, and something deeper that words could not easily explain. "I came to sell quilts," she said simply. Her voice was soft, but it carried clearly. No hesitation, no pleading, just a statement. He glanced at the wagon behind her. Inside, stacked neatly, were more quilts, each one folded with care. Some were bright, some muted, but all carried that same careful stitching. He had seen quilts before, of course, every home had them, but these felt different. There was a kind of life in them, like each one held a piece of a journey. "How much?" he asked, folding his arms. She named a price that made him raise an eyebrow. It was fair, maybe even a little low for the work that had gone into them. He studied her for a moment, trying to understand. Travelers often bargained, often pushed for more. She didn't. "Where you coming from?" he asked. "Far enough," she replied, her gaze steady. "And where you headed?" She paused then, just for a second, before answering. "Wherever I need to be." It wasn't the kind of answer that settled a man's mind. If anything, it stirred more questions, but he didn't press. Instead, he stepped closer to the wagon and picked up another quilt. This one was darker, with deep reds and browns stitched into a pattern that reminded him of the land after rain. Strong, steady, enduring. "You made all these?" he asked. She nodded. He let out a quiet breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Without another word, he counted out the money, more than enough for one quilt. "I'll take them," he said. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. "All of them?" "All of them." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not quite surprise, not quite relief, something in between. She looked back at the wagon, then at him, as if trying to measure his meaning. "You don't even know how many there are," she said. "Don't need to," he replied. He handed her the money, and for a moment neither of them moved. The air felt different now, heavier somehow, like something unseen had stepped between them. Then he cleared his throat and gestured toward the house. "You've come a long way," he said. "You should stay for supper." She hesitated. It was small, but he noticed. Her grip tightened slightly on the quilt she still held. Her eyes shifted, just for a second, toward the road behind her, as if she expected something or someone to appear. "I don't usually stay," she said quietly. "Well," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe this time you should." The sun dipped lower, casting the yard in deeper shades of gold and shadow. The horse by the wagon shifted its weight, letting out a soft breath. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked, and the wind picked up just enough to carry a chill. She looked at him again, longer this time, as if weighing more than just an invitation to supper. And just as she opened her mouth to answer, a faint sound echoed from the road behind them, the the distant rumble of something approaching, slow but certain. The sound rolled closer, steady and low, like wagon wheels pressing hard against dry earth. Both of them turned their heads toward the road at the same time. Dust lifted in the distance, just enough to catch the last light. It was not fast, not rushing, but it was coming straight toward the farm. She stepped back without thinking, the quilt still clutched in her hands. He noticed the change in her right away. The calm she had carried all this time shifted into something tighter, like a string pulled too far. "You expecting someone?" he asked. She shook her head, but it came a moment too late. No. The answer did not settle anything. He had lived on this land long enough to know when a person spoke from habit instead of truth. Still, he did not push her. Instead, he glanced toward the barn where a couple of hands had already gone quiet, watching the road the same way he was. "Could be just another traveler," he said, though his tone carried doubt. She did not reply. Her eyes stayed fixed on the rising dust, and for the first time, he saw something close to worry in them. He looked back at her wagon, at the stacks of handmade quilts arranged with care. It did not look like the setup of someone who traveled without purpose. Everything was too neat, too deliberate. Even the way the quilts were folded told him she had done this many times before, stopping at farms, offering her work, moving on before staying too long. "You've been selling long?" he asked, keeping his voice easy as if the road behind them did not matter. "Long enough," she said. "That all you do? Travel from place to place with quilts?" Her fingers tightened on the fabric. "It's enough to get by." He studied her again. There were small things he had missed at first. The faint mark near her wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. The way her boots were worn not just from distance but from hard ground and quick steps. She had not just traveled. She had kept moving. "Someone teach you to sew like that?" he asked. "My mother," she said, softer now. "She said every quilt should carry a piece of where you've been. That way, you never lose it." He nodded slowly, glancing at the patterns again. That made sense. The colors were not random. Each one felt placed with memory. "What about your family?" he asked. She hesitated again. "Gone." It was a simple word, but it carried weight. He did not ask more. The sound from the road grew louder now. The shape of another wagon began to take form through the dust. 2 horses this time, darker, moving with purpose. The driver sat high, his outline firm against the fading light. She took another small step back. "You sure you don't know them?" he asked quietly. Her voice came low. "I know the kind." That was enough to make him shift his stance. He was not a man who looked for trouble, but he did not step away from it either. Not on his land. "You can come inside," he said. "Supper's ready soon anyway." She looked toward the house, then back at the approaching wagon. The distance between the two seemed to pull at her, like she stood between 2 paths and neither felt safe. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," she said. "Trouble finds its own way," he replied. "Best to meet it standing." For a moment she almost smiled at that, but it faded just as quickly. The second wagon slowed as it neared the fence. The horses stamped the ground, restless from the long road. The man driving them did not call out a greeting. He just looked. That silence said more than words could. One of the farmhands took a few steps closer to the barn door, ready but unsure. The evening had turned from quiet to something sharp, like the air before a storm. He stepped forward, placing himself just slightly ahead of her without making it obvious. His gaze stayed on the stranger. "You know him?" he asked under his breath. She shook her head again, but this time her voice followed. "Not by name." The wagon came to a stop near the edge of the yard. Another man climbed down from the back, slower, watching everything with careful eyes. They were not dressed like traders or simple travelers. Their clothes were rough, worn in a different way, like men who spent more time taking than working. The first man finally spoke. "Evening." His voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. "Evening," came the reply. The man's gaze shifted, moving from him to her, then to the quilts stacked in the wagon. "Well now," he said slowly, "looks like we found what we've been looking for." She went still beside him. He felt it without even looking at her. Whatever stood on that road was not chance. It had followed her here. The man took a step forward, boots pressing into the dirt. "Those quilts ain't yours to sell?" he added. The words hung in the air, heavy and wrong. He turned his head slightly toward her, his voice low. You want to tell me what this is about? She swallowed, her eyes still locked on the men by the wagon. I told you, she said, barely above a whisper. I know the kind. The stranger's hand rested near his belt as he took another step closer. Best you hand them over, he said, and we'll be on our way. The yard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. He did not move. Instead, he folded his arms slowly, his voice steady as he spoke. You're a long way from asking politely. The man's expression shifted, just enough to show he wasn't used to being answered that way. Behind him, the second man circled slightly, eyes on the wagon, on the quilts, on her. And for the first time since she had arrived, she stepped closer to him instead of away. He felt her step without needing to look, the quiet shift of trust or maybe just lack of choice. Either way, it settled something in him. The yard was no longer just his land. It had become a line. You heard me, the man by the wagon said, his voice still even, but sharper now. Those quilts don't belong to her. He tilted his head slightly. Funny thing, he replied. She sold them to me a few minutes ago. Paid for and done. The second man let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. That's so? Then you just bought yourself a problem. The farmhands near the barn exchanged glances. One of them shifted his weight, ready but unsure how far this would go. Trouble on the prairie had a way of spreading if handled wrong. But so did backing down. He kept his voice calm. Seems to me you came a long way to talk about quilts. The first man stepped closer to the fence, resting one hand on the top rail. Not just quilts, he said. Work, time, property. That word hung there. She drew in a slow breath beside him. He could feel it, the way her shoulders tightened again. There was more to this than simple theft. That much was clear now. You want to explain? He asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the men. Her voice came low, meant only for him. They say I owe them. For what? For leaving, he frowned slightly. Leaving what? She hesitated, then answered. A place I wasn't meant to leave. That did not sit right. No place owned a person, not in any way that made sense to him. But he had heard stories. Small towns, tight groups, folks who held on to what they believed was theirs, even when it shouldn't be. The man by the fence tapped the wood lightly with his fingers. You've been making a living off what ain't yours, he called out to her. That stitching, those patterns, that's not something you just walk off with. She stepped forward then, just enough that her voice could carry. My mother taught me, not you. Not anyone back there. The second man shook his head. Your mother was part of it. You know that. Everything she made stayed. That was the deal. She didn't make a deal, she shot back, a flicker of anger breaking through her calm. She worked. That's all. The first man's eyes narrowed slightly. Careful, he said. You don't want to twist things. He watched the exchange closely. This was not just about money or goods. It was about control, about who got to claim what, and who had the right to walk away. You saying she can't sell what she makes? He asked. I'm saying she took more than she had a right to, the man replied. And we aim to take it back. He let out a slow breath, then glanced at the wagon full of quilts. Each one folded with care, each one carrying hours of work. Whatever these men claimed, they had not been the ones stitching those pieces together. Doesn't look taken to me, he said. Looks earned. The second man stepped a little closer now, boots pressing into the dirt. You don't know the whole of it. Then tell me, he said. For a moment, it seemed like the man might, but instead he shook his head. Don't matter. Hand them over and we'll leave quiet. Silence settled again. Behind them, the house stood still, a light beginning to glow faint in one of the windows. Supper would be ready soon, just as he had said. The smell of cooking might have drifted out if not for the tension holding the air tight. She spoke again, softer now. If I give them back, they won't stop. He glanced at her. What do you mean? They'll say I owe more, that I took more. It doesn't end. The words were simple, but they carried truth. He had seen that kind of thing before. Give once, and it turns into a habit for the other side. You planning to keep running? He asked. She looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. I was until now, that answer lingered. The first man straightened from the fence, his patience thinning. Last chance. he said. We're not asking again? The farmhands shifted again, one of them taking a step closer to him now. Not enough to start anything, but enough to show where they stood. He noticed it, and so did the men by the wagon. You really want to make this bigger than it needs to be? The second man asked. He gave a small shrug. Wasn't my doing. The sky had darkened further now, the gold fading into deeper shades. The quiet of evening had turned into something watchful, like the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. She moved just a little closer again, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to do this. He didn't look at her when he answered. I already did. The first man's hand dropped from the fence to his side. Not a threat yet, but close enough to feel like one. Then we'll settle it another way, he said. No one moved for a second. Not the men, not the farmhands, not even the horses. But the feeling in the air changed. And just as it did, a sound came from the house behind them. The door opened, slow and steady, and footsteps started toward the yard. The footsteps from the house were steady, unhurried, but they carried across the yard in a way that made everyone turn. An older figure stepped into the fading light, apron still tied at the waist, hands dusted with flour. The smell of fresh bread drifted faintly behind, warm and out of place against the tight air outside. Well now, the older voice said, calm but firm. This yard's seen its share of dust, but not this kind of gathering at supper time. No one answered right away. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The presence behind him did not break the tension, but it changed it. The farm was no longer just a quiet place on the edge of the road. It felt watched, grounded, like it had roots too deep to be shaken easily. The man by the fence glanced toward the house, then back again. Doesn't concern you, he said. Anything at my table concerns me, came the reply, steady as ever, especially when voices start rising before the meal's even set. She stood still beside him, the quilt held close again, but her shoulders had shifted. Not relaxed, not yet, but no longer as tightly drawn as before. There was something about the house, the light in the window, the smell of supper waiting, that seemed to pull at her in a different way than the road behind. The second man shifted his stance, eyes moving between them all. We're not here for trouble, he said, though his tone said otherwise. We're here for what's ours. And what's that? The older voice asked. The quilts, the first man answered quickly. And what they stand for, that last part lingered. He folded his arms again, his gaze steady. You keep saying that like it means something more than it does? It does, the man snapped. Those patterns aren't just stitching. They belong to a place, a way of doing things. You don't just walk off and sell them like they're nothing. She spoke before he could answer, her voice stronger now. They were never nothing. That's why I took them with me. The words carried across the yard, clear and sharp. For a moment no one spoke. Even the horses seemed to quiet as if listening. You took what wasn't yours to take, the second man said. I took what my mother made, she replied. And what I learned with my own hands. The first man took another step forward, boots pressing harder into the dirt. You don't get to decide that. He shifted slightly, placing himself between them again without making a show of it. Seems to me she already did. The tension rose again, tighter than before. It was no longer just words. It was about to turn into something else, something no one would easily walk away from. Behind him, one of the farmhands moved closer than another, not rushing, not aggressive, but steady. They were not looking for a fight, but they were not stepping aside either. This was their land too, their work, their home. The older figure from the house stepped a little closer as well, wiping hands slowly on the apron, eyes sharp despite the calm voice. No one's taking anything from this yard tonight, came the quiet statement. The first man let out a short breath. You're making a mistake? Could be, came the reply. But it won't be the first. A faint wind moved through the yard, lifting a corner of one of the quilts still resting in the wagon. The fabric shifted, catching what little light remained, its pattern briefly coming alive again. It looked like more than cloth. It looked like memory, like work, like something that had taken time to build and would not be easily handed over. She watched it too, her grip tightening again. I'm not going back, she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for all to hear. The second man glanced at the first. Something unspoken passed between them. This was no longer going the way they had expected. You really think this place will hold you? The first man asked her. She did not answer right away. Instead, she looked at the house, at the open door, at the light spilling out onto the ground. Then she looked at him, standing firm without hesitation, as if the decision had already been made long before the question was asked. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know I won't keep running. The words settled deep. He felt something shift again, not just in her, but in the space around them. This was no longer just about quilts or money or claims. It was about staying or leaving, about standing or giving in. The first man's jaw tightened. Then you leave us no choice. He took another step forward. At the same time, one of the farmhands moved to stand beside him, then another. The older figure from the house did not step back. The yard, once quiet and open, now felt small, crowded with decisions that could not be undone. No one spoke. The last light of day slipped away, leaving only the glow from the house and the faint outline of figures facing one another. She shifted again, this time not back, not away, but forward, right beside him. And as the distance between both sides closed just enough to make every breath feel louder, the moment hung there, balanced on the edge of what would come next. For a long second, no one moved. The yard held its breath, every person standing between what had been said and what might come next. Then he took a single step forward, slow and certain, enough to make it clear he was not backing down. That's close enough, he said, his voice firm but even. No one's taking anything from here. The first man stopped where he was. His eyes shifted, not just to him, but to the others now standing shoulder to shoulder. The farmhands were no longer uncertain. The older figure from the house stood steady, gaze unbroken. Even the quiet of the place felt like it had chosen a side. You're making this harder than it needs to be, the man said. Seems to me it was already hard before you got here, came the reply. Silence fell again, but it was different now. Not sharp, not ready to snap, but heavy with thought. The second man looked around the yard, taking in the numbers, the stance, the stillness that came from people who had already decided they would not step aside. She's one person, he said under his breath, almost to his companion. And this is just quilts. The first man did not answer right away. His jaw tightened, but something in his expression shifted, just enough to show doubt had found its way in. She stood close beside him, no longer shrinking back. The quilt in her hands was held firm, not like something fragile, but like something worth keeping. Her voice came steady when she spoke. You said it yourself, she told them. It's not just quilts. That stopped them more than anything else. The older figure from the house stepped forward, just a little, voice calm but clear. You came all this way for something you claim matters, came the words. But look around. What you're asking for, you're asking to take, not earn. The second man shifted his weight again, uneasy now. We're not thieves. No, the reply came, but you're acting like it. The first man finally exhaled, long and slow. He looked at her again, really looked this time, as if seeing more than just someone who had walked away. Maybe he saw the miles in her stance, the work in her hands, the quiet strength that had carried her this far. You should have stayed, he said, though the edge in his voice had softened. And stayed what? She asked. Owing more each day? Being told what I can and can't make with my own hands? He had no quick answer for that. The wind moved through the yard again, softer now, lifting the edges of the quilts in the wagon. For a moment, the patterns seemed to speak louder than any of them. Stories of work, of memory, of something passed down but not owned. The second man glanced at the first. This ain't worth it, he said quietly. Not like this. Another long pause followed. Then, slowly, the first man stepped back. It was not much, just a single step, but it changed everything. The tension that had filled the yard loosened, just enough to let breath return. We'll go, he said, though his voice carried a warning that had not fully left. But this don't settle things. She met his gaze without stepping back. It settles enough. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue again. But instead, he turned, giving a short nod to the other man. They moved back toward their wagon, movement slower now, less certain than before. No one stopped them. The sound of their wagon wheels faded into the distance, the same way it had come, until the road was quiet again. Only then did the yard truly breathe. The farmhands eased their stance, exchanging glances that carried both relief and a bit of disbelief. The older figure from the house let out a soft breath, then gave a small nod toward the door. "Supper's getting cold," came the gentle reminder, as if the whole moment had been nothing more than a passing storm. He turned slightly toward her. She had not moved, still standing where the tension had left her, the quilt held close. "They're gone," he said. "I know," she replied, though her voice held something more than relief. It held the weight of what could have been. He glanced at the wagon full of quilts, then back at her. "You meant what you said?" She looked at him. "About not running?" He nodded. "Yes," she said, "I did." There was no hesitation now. He gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Good." The word was simple, but it carried welcome. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet returned, but it felt different now. Not empty, but settled, like something had found its place. Then he gestured toward the house again. "You still got that supper waiting?" She hesitated, just for a second, out of habit more than fear. Then she looked at the open door, the light, the warmth that had stayed through it all. "I suppose I do," she said softly. They walked toward the house together, not rushed, not uncertain. Behind them, the quilts rested in the wagon, no longer just goods to be sold, but something claimed, chosen, and protected. And as the door closed behind them, the farm returned to its quiet, holding on to the memory of what had been decided there. Thanks for watching this story. Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Tell me in the comments what you felt about this story and what kind of stories you want to see next. Until then, take care of yourself and remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's whole life.